If you're a business owner, or not, would you purposely damage or destroy your property? When I ask this question online, most people don't want to answer because they know I'm referring to slavery. They start to realize that it doesn't make sense for the vast majority of slave owners to purposely damage or destroy their property. That is counterproductive to a good business, but apparently the abolitionists, media, historians, and indoctrinated people want you to believe that this was going on a major scale. Yes, some slave owners were mistreating their slaves, but not the vast majority. WTF. All the way WTF. Welcome to Black History Decoded, where I give insight into Black or African history that has been misrepresented over the centuries. I'm going to prove that these people are ignorant about slavery and should not talk about it. Like most people, a huge chunk of their information about slavery is coming from the North. A one-sided narrative is problematic. Now look at this. This right here is making a mockery of abolitionists. Abolitionists, like many people right now, propagated this notion that Black people were pathetic under slavery, that they only were capable of doing menial jobs, and they were constantly whipped, raped, family taken away from them, underfed, and not paid. This is all a gross exaggeration. Slavery was around for the longest time, and these people seem to be offended by the mere mention of slaves having skills. Before I start lambasting these people, I'm going to let you in on a secret about propaganda. If I want to demonize somebody, or someone wants to demonize me, let's say that 20% of my history is bad and 80% of my history is good. What are you going to focus on? Well, you're going to focus on the 20% and completely ignore the 80%. That's exactly what they did with slavery. If you want to destroy a system or a person, you just talk about the negative parts. You don't talk about the good parts. Everything has to be bad, and you repeat it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again until it's stuck into people's minds and they can't think anything else. They play the same game with Black or African history. If you go according to the Western narrative about history, the stuff that you're taught in schools, basically Black people didn't do much of anything in history before slavery. White people and others did stuff in history, but Black people, they were pathetic. The truth about history is coming out, and they can't fight it anymore. In the clip I'm about to show you, Sam is talking a bit about the lost cause and what the Southerners felt about Reconstruction. I'm going to explain to you that he doesn't know what he's talking about.
And the idea that Reconstruction failed in many respects because it gave too much authority to Black people, as opposed to it failed under literal physical assault by white people, and a failure of the federal government to come to the aid of Black people in southern states, at least in terms of, beyond those amendments.
First of all, Reconstruction did not fail. The reason why it was called Reconstruction was because the Southern culture was different from that of the North, and they had to create a Northern culture in the South. Who won the war? The North. So they came down to claim their prize, because that's what you do when you win. They eventually took charge of the South. There were hundreds upon hundreds of Black people in positions of power in the South. Not the North, the South. You see this here? A whole bunch of Black people getting into positions of power in the legislature in various states. There were also a lot of Black people in positions of power in other capacities. The South, not the North. The North has absolutely no kind of structure like that for Black people. It is frowned upon. So why would they all of a sudden allow it to happen in the South? Now, what I'm saying to you is that the South was a lot more friendlier to Black people than the North. A lot more, but the North won, so the North can tell the history the way they see fit. But you can tell a lot by examining the culture. Also, you could judge a person or a people by their actions, not what they say. The North did not condone mixing of the races, which was heavily done in the South. Constantly being amongst and protecting Black people, because that's what you do when you have property, you protect it. and allowing a whole bunch of black people to get into positions of power. When Northerners started taking control of the South, they got together with racist Southerners, because yes, there were racist Southerners, of course, and they started terrorizing and kicking those black people out of power. Then they forced a law of separation on them, a law that didn't exist before the Northern invasion. So that's what I mean by Reconstruction. They had to reconstruct the South in the image of the North. The North had de facto segregation. The South did not. So what did the Northerners have to do in order to change that? These people are mixing. They seem to love mixing, and they get along with each other. We can't have that. So they force a law of separation on the Southerners. It was a hostile takeover, clearly, but again, they're telling the narrative, so they're supposed to appear like the good guys, but they really weren't.
I think what they're doing is I think that they're probably going to show some of the folks that eventually parlayed being a blacksmith into doing things later in life. But the reality is all of that is rooted in whatever is factual. They listed everything out. And if you have any questions about it, just ask the Department of Education. You can talk about those folks. But I mean, these were scholars who put that together. It was not anything that was done politically.
I find it fascinating that people are upset that he's mentioning a fact, a reality. You know what? I think they're scared because if we have a proper, honest conversation about slavery, a lot of truths will come out and it will destroy their narrative. So all the things that they said before, it will be debunked, and it's almost as if like nobody could trust you anymore because you've been spreading a lot of lies and misinformation. Almost intentionally.
I mean, the way that you do this politically is you choose your scholars based upon their political orientation.
Fascinating, right? Scholars based on their political orientation. What Sam said there is exactly what Northern scholars did. Scholars based on their political orientation manipulate the history of the South and told their narrative and ignored the Southern narrative. The same way white scholars, based on their political orientation, manipulated African or black history. They ignore what the Africans or black people say about their own history, and the white scholars say whatever they want about African or black history. And lo and behold, we didn't do much of anything in history. You see the deception?
They have gone after the idea of talking about slavery or civil rights issues or Jim Crow or red line, whatever it is in our history as a country, of the practice of white supremacy and the mechanisms in which that undergirded it.
There have been comments about the depth and breadth of these standards. Anyone who can read these standards, you can see the topics that are covered are in depth, and there's nothing that is left out.
If you read this properly, there's no way, shape, or form where they say they're not going to talk about these bad events in history. They are also going to talk about economic developments of and for African Americans post-World War I, including the spending power and the development of black businesses and innovations, and somehow that's a problem.
Added to the curriculum, the idea that slavery actually provided some material benefit for slaves.
Sam seems to be upset with the truth. This kind of attitude suggests that, no, I only want to hear the negative stuff about slavery. I don't want to hear about the good stuff. This kind of attitude gets on my nerves because basically they want black people to be pathetic under slavery because that's what slavery was about apparently. Slavery that existed for hundreds of years in various societies and was obviously successful. If you hear negative things about a particular subject all the time, day in, day out, then that's what you're going to believe. But there's another side to the story, but it seems that he's not open enough to actually want to understand the other side. Very sad.
To characterize slavery as the way in which they got skills is a bizarre interpretation of this.
All this is in his mind. You can see that he's so upset that they're mentioning that slaves had skills under slavery. Upset or confused. It's one of those or both of those. Like they're only supposed to be picking cotton. Also, I guarantee you there are people out there that actually think that black people were just picking cotton or doing menial, simple chores. No sophistication whatsoever. So when all of a sudden the mere mention of slaves having skills, some people are throwing a hissy fit. They did not say that they only got skills under slavery. They did not say that. From my understanding, they never said that. This is his interpretation, which is off.
It's pretty old, right? In that, slavery by slavery defenders was often depicted as benevolent. So this is in some way as old as time.
You know why they say it was a benevolent system? Because as I mentioned earlier, Caucasians and Negroes were getting along a lot better in the South than they were in the North, and that's because of slavery. Teamwork makes the dream work. There were white people under slavery. We know that in business, which slavery was, no dissension is tolerated. You're supposed to get along with your coworkers for the good of the business, right? Instilling this into the slaves or workers for generations upon generations, you will have a better society. When they get out of slavery, Caucasians and Negroes are working together, no problem, which is why there were so many black people in positions of power in the South. Not the North, the South. I know what I'm talking about. The way they talk about slavery, it's the worst thing ever. But in reality, it wasn't. I mean, there were problems. Like in every society, there's negative points and there's positive points. They just focused on the negative and completely ignored the positive.
And it is racist in its construction in the first part, which is that the slaves were just, people without any skills or without any education prior to being taken to the United States against their will. I mean, it erases some of the technical knowledge that a lot of people had before they were enslaved in this country.
Again, who said Africans didn't have skills before they came to America? Did one of the Florida educators say this, or is this her interpretation? I'm willing to bet it's her interpretation, and she's way off base. I don't know how you could infer that by mentioning black people having skills under slavery automatically implies that before slavery they didn't have skills. How could you interpret something like that? Where do you come off?
And like, what is the skills that they were able to translate into being basically small business owners is the implication. I mean, a lot of this was like put into systems of sharecropping, which was a way to further prevent freed black people from owning the means of production as well.
You get that? She doesn't even know what skills they had. She has a lack of knowledge of slavery, but yet she wants to speak on it. I don't know if I mentioned it before or here, but when black people got out of slavery, it was much easier to attack and marginalize them. And that's because they were not property anymore. So if you pay attention to the clip, she's basically also admitting that even if they had skills under the so-called free system, they will be marginalized anyway. So she's admitting that the so-called free system was bad even after slavery. But isn't the free system supposed to be better than slavery? There were black people that were lucky to get sharecropping under the so-called free system. There were some black people that were denied jobs, because that's what you could do now. You could deny black people jobs, which otherwise they would have been working under slavery, having food, shelter, clothing, healthcare, no problem. Under the so-called free system, it was much more difficult.
Yeah. The whippings, the raping, the starvation in some instances, like that was just a way to kind of build calluses, both figuratively and literally.
That was not happening to the vast majority of the slaves. This is what this woman and others want you to believe. She's literally describing a dystopian society, a Black Mirror episode. I would ask them if they think that black people back then were feeble-minded, docile, doltish people, because there's no way the vast majority of black people are going to be treated that savagely and not burn down the entire South. People with this kind of attitude are literally saying that black people back then were feeble-minded, docile, doltish people. No people would tolerate that kind of savagery if it happened to the vast majority. No people. A minority of slaves were subjected to that kind of nonsense, and those slaves did something about it. They ran away or they rebelled, not the vast majority. These people want you to believe that the vast majority of black people tolerated that crap and pretty much didn't do anything about it. They would have burned down the entire South. When white people talk about our history, we can't do anything right. We are so pathetic. We have to have an honest conversation about history because their narrative has been pervasive throughout the centuries, and it's really ridiculous and infuriating when you figure out the lies that they've been telling. Like, share, subscribe, and make a comment. Thanks.
After they were freed, for the vast majority of them, the lives were very similar looking to slavery in some respects. Others were able to see some success in certain areas.